Nathan and welcome to Teach the Table. Today I'm going to teach you how to play Robinson Crusoe. It's a game for 1 to 4 players where everyone's going to be survivors stuck on a deserted island and they're working towards a common goal. There's a bunch of different scenarios and there's more that you can buy as well as fan ones online. So it's almost more of like a system. Each game, each scenario plays a lot differently than the other one, lots of different goals. So let's set it up and I'll show you what you're going to be doing. Robinson Crusoe is a game where each player is a character stranded on a deserted island, and it's a cooperative game where we're each trying to accomplish a goal together. So we either all win or we all lose. There are 6 scenarios in the game. I'm going to be showing the scenario 1, Castaways, where we're trying to get wood to build a wood pile so a ship can come and save us. But each one's a little different. I'm not going to get into each one, but I'll show you in general how the game is played. There's a lot going on the board and lots of bits in the game to mess around with. But in general, in the upper left-hand corner, it shows you all the 6 phases of each round. And it goes 1, 2, 3. Phase 4 is most of the actions on the board here, and then phase 5 and 6, which I'll get into the specifics. But since the 4th phase is primarily what you're going to be doing in the game, I'm going to spend most of my time talking about that. Each player is going to have a different character here and their own little pawn, so each person gets 2 actions each round. And they also have a tracker here tracking their health on the bottom of the card. Each character has areas on their body pointed out on the picture, and those are areas where little wound tokens can go as the game describes, so I would just recommend reading up on that when that happens. Each character has these actions that they can do. They can do each one once per round. So once you do it, they recommend just putting a token or something on there so that you know that you've done that this round, and then that'll come off at the end. Each player also has their own individual item that they specialize in making, so they can potentially build that item if they meet the requirements up here. So if we have discovered fire, then we can make the fireplace. If you do so, only this character can make it, and if they do, they also get 2 determination tokens for doing it, as well as the benefit on the card. And then the other thing is on the bottom here, as their hearts go down, if they take wounds, there's the little morale symbol here. So morale is going to decrease on each character after they take a certain number of wounds. So once they've taken their 4th wound, they're going to cross that morale spot, and the morale for the whole group is going to go down, I guess because you're so injured. So that happens for each character. It's going to ruin the morale for the entire group. If you ever do gain your hearts back and you go across that morale symbol, you just ignore it. So you're never gonna have that happen more than once for each icon. Briefly going over what all the areas of the board are. This section, which is the first phase, is the event cards. These are going to be coming out and they're basically telling you some sort of story bits, something that's happening on the island. This is our morale tracker. So as a group, we have morale together. Right now it starts at 0, but as you get more morale, you can possibly get more tokens, which will help you in the game. This is the area of the island. It starts out pretty unexplored. We just have this 1 tile, but there are more tiles that will come out in the game, and we can explore more areas of the island. Over here is where all of our goods that we find, which are mostly food, wood, pelts, things like that. Any goods that you collect during the round go up here, and then at the end of that, they go down here so that you can actually use them. So right here is where all your stuff is going to be. Over here is where we can build a shelter. You can build roofs for your shelter, or you can build palisades, which are basically like walls or fences around to protect you. You also have your weapon level here, which you can build up. There's just a tracker for that. The higher the weapon level, the better you are at fending off animals coming at you and going out and hunting other animals. All of these cards here, these are all items that you can build. Right now, none of them are built except for these 2. These are special items that we start out with, and they have little tokens on them that you can take off each time you use that item. But once you build an item, you're going to flip it over, and it's going to show that you have that completed. Down here, this is the section where the event cards will go. So there's some bad stuff that will happen, which I'll get into later. This is where the hunting cards would go. So right now there's no beasts in there, and stuff has to happen in the game for you to get cards in there, which then you can go hunting wild beasts. These 3 actions here are building, gathering, and exploring on the island, and they come with adventure cards which might be drawn, as well as each one has its own set of dice that you have to roll. So there's a little bit of a luck element if you're going to be able to do those actions. Then there's cleaning up your camp, as well as resting just to get health. The last phases of the game are over here. This is the weather phase, which there may or may not be any weather that you have to deal with, as well as the night phase where you have to sleep. And then it's going to start all over again up here and just go across like that. So first, I'm going to show you what all the actions are in the game because that's the majority of the game, and I'm sure people are still halfway awake at this point in the video. Each player has 2 pawns of a single color, and those will represent the 2 things that they want to do in each round. You can do things with other players, but there's always going to be one player that's the primary person. So you signify that by putting the primary person on top. So if there's any risks or rewards, that goes to the other person, the blue person in this case. The yellow person would just be there for moral support to help the mission go through more successfully. But we're all going to have our pawns, place them around the board, talk about it, and we all get to decide that first simultaneously before the actions are taken. I mentioned that the event cards up here are going to get read aloud, give a little bit of a story of something happening on the island, and then those cards are going to come down here where there's actions you can take to discard the card. The reason for that is on the very bottom, it will say something bad that happens to you. In this case, nothing happens in this particular card, but as more come out, a new card would push this one to the left, and a new one would eventually push that off the table, and at that point, the bottom bad stuff would happen. So that's the first action you can do in the game, is just going there. In this case it says 1 or 2 people can go there, and various things can happen. I mentioned that you can't do the hunting action unless there's already beast cards there, which will come out throughout the game. But if there are some there, then you can take the top one. It's going to take 2 people to do this action, and you'll have an encounter with that animal. In this case, it's a puma. So you compare with the skull icon, compare that to your weapon level. So if our weapon level is not 5 or greater, we're going to take 1 wound for each difference of that. So if our weapon level was 0, that would be 5 wounds. The next section here with the skull and crossbones, these animals can potentially damage your weapon, so you would decrease your weapon level. In this case, it doesn't decrease it at all. And then you have the spoils of war here. So we get 2 food and 1 pelt for doing that. So even if your weapon level does not even closely match up to the animal, it's still considered that you killed that animal. You just probably bored them to death or bludgeoned them slowly. But you'll still get the spoils of war as long as you're still alive and still in the game. To do the building action, you'd actually put your people not here on the board, but over here on whatever you're going to build. So you can build a shelter. You start out just sleeping under the stars. So shelter will help protect you, as well as once you have a shelter, you can build up your roof level to protect you from the elements, or a palisade to protect you from other animals or potentially people. The cost to do that is up here. So in a 3-player game, it costs either 3 wood or 2 pelts to do any of those things. You can also build up your weapon level, so you can build it up by 1, pay 1 wood, and you can build it up by 1. You can also build any of these inventions that haven't already been built, but you have to meet the prerequisites to do so. So a lot of these are different types of terrain you have to have explored. Starting out, we have this beach tile here, so we would put one of these little tokens here to signify that we found a beach. So that prerequisite is met, and if someone wanted, they could put their pawn on the shovel and build the shovel this turn. So the builder action can be done with 1 or 2 players. So you can either build that shovel by yourself, or you could have someone else go and give you a little moral support to do so. The reason you might do that is it would guarantee victory if there was 2 people that did it. Otherwise, if you did it by yourself, there's a little bit of a risk of maybe that won't be successful. And with each action that you do, you're going to roll the associated dice of that color. And there's a damage die, so you would lose potentially hearts. This is the victory die, so if you had 2 people, you wouldn't need to roll this, but otherwise you roll this die, and if you get this icon, it's not a success. You get 2 determination tokens, which are these little tokens in the game, which help you do actions, but you need this icon, sort of the V for victory is how I look at it. I think it's bones, but that would mean that it was a success. And then there's also this other die which has a question mark on it. So if you get the question mark, that means that you need to resolve one of the cards from the associated deck. And this is how all 3 of these actions happen. So there's the gathering and the exploring, which all are the same way. 1 or 2 people, you always roll the die and then potentially have a card that you have to do as well. The gathering action lets you put your pawn on certain resources on the board on tiles that have been explored, and you could gather resources, like you could gather fish, which is food. You cannot do it on the space where your camp is located. So starting out in the game, you can't put it on any of these spots because you're already going to get those resources toward the beginning of the round. But once there's more spaces that have been explored, then you can potentially put your pawn on those and gather the resources. You can only choose one of these types. You cannot put it here and gather wood and food. You'd have to choose which one you want to do. So you can only do it on spaces that are adjacent to the tile where your camp is, or you can do it on spaces that are one tile away from where your camp is. However, there is a penalty. So if you wanted to do this as a guaranteed success, you'd actually need 3 actions to do that. Otherwise, if you put just 2, then there's still that same risk where you have to roll the die and it might not be a victory. The exploration or the green action works similarly, where you're going to put one of your pawns on a space next to where your camp is, and you can get a tile at random that goes there that's been explored. You can do it next to or adjacent to the tile where your camp is, or you can do it one away. However, you could not do it if our camp looked like this. You couldn't explore out here. It always has to be contiguous, and it's got the same rule as with gathering, that if you were going to explore a tile 2 away from your camp, then there's that penalty where you'd have to have at least 2 people, and then there's still the risk from the die of it not being successful. Or if you had 3 people, then it's a guaranteed success. So you're going to put it out there and just get a tile at random that comes out. And then there's some icons on the card when it first comes out that are resolved. So this little beast icon would mean that there's a beast card that's going to go into your hunting deck. And there's various icons here, which some of them might be permanent shelters. So if your camp was moved to there, you're considered to have a shelter at all times. This little circular icon on there is a discovery token, which there's a number of them in the game. So you're going to choose one at random, and then that's going to go into your resources later in the game as something that you can get. So you can, in this case, increase your morale using this token. So they're all different. The little tiki icon in this particular castaways scenario does not do anything, but in other scenarios it does. The other thing that you need to look at is what type of terrain type it is. So this is a mountain terrain type, or cliffs, or whatever you want to call it. So you're going to look at your inventions and put a little token on each one that has that, to show that you've explored that type of terrain, so you can potentially build one of those items. Some icons in the game will have this little pawn icon, player icon, with a color in the background. And what that indicates is that you can take the pawn of that color and you can use it. But these pawns are not like all the regular people pawns, they're just for support. So you can use them basically solely for things that correspond to that color. So green would correspond to the explore action, and this dog could give you a support if you were going to explore. So if you were going to explore already, you could say, hey, I was going to go here, and the dog will just be able to support. So it lets you have the benefit of 2 pawns being there, and you're the primary one. The dog's not actually going to be doing anything, he's just helping you out. Same way works with the red, so the red would be for the hunting action. So the dog could just support you in this case. The last couple actions on the board here are arranging the camp, so kind of just tidying up and cleaning up. You can get 2 determination tokens, and you raise the morale tracker by 1. And then the last one is just resting, so you could put a pawn there and just gain 1 heart. Pretty self-explanatory. If you're playing with 4 players, there is a special card in the game that you put over the arranging the camp action, so you don't get 2 tokens and raise morale. You have to choose one or the other, so it makes the game a little bit harder. After everyone's placed all their pawns and they've decided what they want to do in this action round, then the actions are going to take place. They're going to go from basically left to right here on the board so that it all goes in a clear order, but they're going to be considered to be happening simultaneously. So any resources that you gain, or tokens or items, they're all going to go up to the top here, even if you're building inventions. So if we built this invention, it's going to go up there to signify that we don't have them right yet. We can't use them in this round if we need to, or if something happens. But at the end of the action phase, then they'll come down here and they'll be available to us. It's a good idea when you're planning your actions to take the resources that you would be using and putting them on top of your pawn to signify that you'd be using them. So in this case, to build a shelter, it would cost 3 wood. So I could put my 3 wood on there, just so you don't run into a problem where we're going to do our actions and then we realize that someone else was already accounting for that wood. And also, anytime you roll these victory dice to see if you're successful, if you don't get a successful roll, all the resources you were gonna spend still are gonna stay in your supply. You didn't waste them. You're just gonna get 2 determination tokens like it says on the die, and then the action will not go through. So you won't get the benefit of it. So those are the actions of the game, which are the majority of the game and the hardest thing to wrap your mind around. But I'll go through how each phase actually works now. So starting out with the event deck, so we're going to take the top card from here. You don't do this at the very beginning of the game because you got this food crates that starts out there. So you're considering to already have done that. But what's going to happen is you will draw 1 card, read what it says, something happens, and then that card will go down to the bottom here. If there's already a card here, it's going to go to the left like so. And then eventually if something pushes it off, then the bottom of the card will happen. There might be other cards too which are shuffled in. So some of these gathering cards, for example, they say shuffle it into the deck. So you shuffle that in, and if these are the cards at the top, you're going to draw it, do what it says, and then you keep going until you draw one of these little flag cards for an event. So there could be multiple cards drawn. When it comes to the event deck, when you draw a card at the beginning of the round, there's 2 different types. So first is the book icon here, and all that does is you do what it says on your scenario. So in the starting scenario, the book says it has no effect. So it's just basically a story. So you would resolve the top of the card, and then the card's going to go down at the bottom of the board with an action that you can do to discard the card. The other ones are little question marks. So they correspond to a question mark tile of that color, which corresponds to one of these adventure decks. In this case, it's the gray one, which is the gathering one. So that gray tile is going to go on top of that deck, and then the next time you do a gathering icon, when you go to roll the dice, regardless of whether or not you get a question mark and you have to resolve one of those cards in the deck, you're just going to have to do it anyways because that token is on top of the deck, and then you'll just discard that token to indicate that you've done it. The second phase of the game is the morale phase. So you're literally just going to look at this, see where your morale is on the track, and you could gain determination tokens or lose determination tokens, or up here gain 2 or get a health back. Now the person who benefits or loses from this is whoever has the first player token. So this is a token that's going to go around at the end of each round. It gets passed, so everyone will get a couple chances to be the starting player. So they're the one who potentially would gain or lose in this situation. After the morale phase, we have the production phase. All that means is the tile that has your camp token on there is going to get resources. So in this case, we would get 1 wood and 1 food, and those go to our available resources. Fourth phase is the action phase, which is what I've already gone over. So you're gonna do all your planning, put all your pawns out, decide what you're gonna do, and then you're gonna resolve all of those actions in order. At the end of that, all the resources that you gain during this phase and other tokens are gonna go down to the available resources spot. Any inventions that you had up there are going to come down to the invention spot and be flipped over to show that they are active, and you'll take your pawns back. Fifth phase is the weather phase. Over here, there's 3 different weather die, and you're going to have to roll them depending on what the scenario says in each round. So starting in round 4, in this case, we start rolling the orange die. There's a couple different types of clouds on here. There's a snowy cloud with a snowflake. There's also a rainy cloud with the rain. And then this last die is the hungry animals die, so you might have to fight an animal or take a wound or something like that. But first, what you're going to do is look at how many snow clouds there are. So in this case, there's just 1. This die has 2 on it. So let's say it was 3. So what you're going to do is you're going to have to burn that much wood because it got really cold. So that would be 3 wood that you have to discard from the supply. Then if there was any other clouds, you'd have to add up the total number of clouds. So in this case, it would be 2 rain clouds and 1 snow cloud, so a total of 3 clouds. You're going to compare that to your roof level, and if you don't have a roof level that's adequate, you're going to have to discard 1 wood and 1 food for each roof level that you're sufficient. So if our roof level was 1, we had 3 clouds, you'd have to discard 2 wood and 2 food. For each resource, either the wood for the cold or the wood and the food for the number of clouds, each resource, if you can't get rid of it, each player is going to take a wound for every single resource. The 6th and final phase of the game is the night phase. So this is the phase when all the players get to sleep and recuperate. Starting out, they need to eat. So you're going to discard 1 food from the supply for each player. If there's not enough food, you need to decide which players don't get to eat, and each player that can't eat is going to take 2 wounds for going hungry. The second thing that you can do is you can move the little camp tile, which is either your shelter or just your regular camp, and you can move it to an adjacent tile that you've explored. So if there's a tile with better resources, or if it's closer to other places you can explore, then you're going to move that. If you already have a shelter and you move it, then you're going to have to decrease your roof and palisade level if you have it. You're going to reduce them by half because you can't bring the whole thing with you. If you just have a plain old camp like this, there's no repercussions. You can just move it to one adjacent tile. If you haven't built the shelter, you just have the regular camp, and your camp is not on a tile with a temporary shelter, as indicated on there, then your players are going to be exposed for the night. So every player is going to take 1 wound for sleeping out in the open air. Also, at the end of the night phase, all the yellow cubes that you have left over that you haven't used, those are food that's going to spoil and go bad. So it's just going to basically get discarded at the end of the round. So try to use them if you can. Any of these orange cubes, those represent food that will not spoil. So you don't have to worry about that. Save that for later. The rest of the night phase is just cleanup. So you're going to take away any black markers. If you had put a marker to indicate that you've used one of your actions that you can only use once per round, you're going to move the marker up here on your scenario to indicate that you're on to the next round, and then you're going to pass the first player token to the next player. The only way to win is to complete the scenario and the goal that it says on there. There's lots of ways to lose. So if any one player dies and their health goes all the way down to the skull and crossbones here, then they're dead and everyone's going to lose the game immediately. If you ever run out of rounds and complete all these rounds and you're not able to complete the scenario, then you lose automatically. There's lots of other tokens and bits and effects and things that happen in the game, and I would just recommend just reading what it does. Also keep the symbol chart here handy so that you can easily see what something does, but just look it up as it happens, because there's way too many rules to explain all at the beginning of the game, and if someone's new to it, you're just going to wear them out before the game even starts. The biggest takeaway from this game for me is that it's ruthless. It's very, very hard to win. Every time I win, I wonder if we did something wrong that accidentally made it easier for ourselves. Anytime there's a token or a resource that you're supposed to spend and you're not able to do it, you're going to take a wound. If it's something that affects the whole table, then everyone's going to take a wound. The only exception is some cards will say, if possible, then you discard a resource. So that's only if it's possible. There's no downside. There's no wounds that you have to take if you're not able to do that. So that's how you play Robinson Crusoe. I have the first edition of the game. There is a new second edition that just came out. They're a little different box, so it might look different to you. The bits, if you have the newer edition, the bits are a little bit different. Instead of yellow cubes for food, they're little bananas, and some parts of the board are more cleaned up and improved. But otherwise, it's the same game. It still plays the same. I haven't seen any major rules changes in it. Like I said, you're probably going to lose the game, especially if it's your first time playing. If you do win, especially if you win handily, then you probably forgot a rule here or there. So just keep that in mind. It's not about winning all the time. It's just about having fun. So if your group is really into the theme and they're willing to get down into that theme, then they're going to have even a better time. And like I said, don't forget to have fun. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.